Welcome to the Hodja on Architecture podcast season 7. AI and Architectural Design, Chapter 1, From Tool to Partner, Rethinking Design Intelligence. This season is called AI and Architectural Design. Over the next 10 episodes, we will explore how artificial intelligence does not simply introduce a new tool into architectural practice, but begins to reshape the very structure of design thinking itself. We are not approaching AI as software, nor as a matter of efficiency, and certainly not as a shortcut for producing images. Instead, we will read it as a cognitive interface, as a condition through which ideas are generated, negotiated, and made visible. Before we decide what AI does for architecture, we must first understand what it does to thinking, and that transformation does not begin with machines, but with our own willingness to engage with them. There is a familiar tension in the air. Conversations around artificial intelligence are often framed through anxiety. Will it replace us? Will it diminish our skills? Will it make design effortless and therefore meaningless? These concerns are not without reason, but they also echo earlier moments in the history of design. Architecture has always been shaped by technological shifts, not because technology defines it, but because it reveals how much of our practice depends on particular ways of working. When those ways are challenged, what appears as a crisis is often a reconfiguration. We have seen this before. When computer-aided design entered architectural practice, it was not embraced as an innocent advancement. There was resistance, and even a certain nostalgia for the drawing board. Many believed that moving from hand to screen meant losing the intimacy of thinking through drawing. And yet, over time, the discipline did not collapse. It adapted, not because digital tools replaced thinking, but because they demanded a different kind of thinking. Precision, iteration, and speed were no longer separate from the act of design. They became embedded within it. Those who learned to think through the tool continued to shape the discipline. Those who did not gradually found themselves outside its evolving language. A similar transformation occurred with the rise of the internet. Access to information expanded dramatically, and with it came a shift in what it meant to know. Knowledge was no longer tied to possession, but to navigation. Designers no longer needed to hold everything in memory. They needed to understand how to locate, evaluate, and connect information. Once again, the question was not whether the internet improved design. The question was whether one could operate within a new cognitive environment. Those who adapted extended their reach. Those who resisted remained limited not by ability, but by orientation. Artificial intelligence enters this lineage, but in a more intimate way. AutoCAD accelerated drawing. The internet accelerated access. Artificial intelligence begins to operate within the space of thinking itself. It does not simply assist production or retrieval. It participates in generating ideas. This is why the discomfort feels deeper. It is no longer about working faster. It is about understanding where thinking begins and where it is extended. To approach this properly, we need to be precise. Artificial intelligence does not think in the way humans do. It does not understand context, intention, or meaning in a conscious sense. And yet, it produces outputs that appear coherent, sometimes even inventive. The risk is to confuse this appearance with understanding. But the opportunity lies elsewhere. AI allows fragments of thought to become external. It reveals associations, variations, and possibilities that might otherwise remain unarticulated. It does not replace thinking, but it alters the conditions under which thinking takes place. This is where a clear position emerges. Artificial intelligence is neither approached as a shortcut nor as a replacement for design intelligence, but as a partner. Not an equal partner, but an operative one. A system that does not decide but responds. A system that does not think but exposes thinking. In traditional design processes, much of what occurs within the designer's mind remains invisible. Decisions materialize in drawings, models, and final outputs, yet the reasoning behind them often resists clear articulation. Artificial intelligence disrupts this opacity. It generates a record of interaction, leaving behind a sequence of decisions, adjustments, and responses. In the design studio, this shift becomes immediately visible. When students work with AI, the process no longer moves in a straight line from idea to outcome. Instead, it unfolds as a series of iterations. Prompts are written, outputs are generated, selections are made, and directions are revised. The work becomes less about presenting a final object and more about navigating a process. Students are required to make decisions at each step: what to accept, what to reject, and how to guide the next move. In doing so, they are forced to articulate their thinking in ways that were previously optional. Within this process, the prompt emerges as a critical element. It is not simply a technical instruction, it is a conceptual act. To write a prompt is to define a position, to establish parameters, and to frame a direction. In this sense, the prompt functions as a form of design thinking before design takes material form. The quality of the outcome is directly related not to the sophistication of the tool, but to the clarity of the thinking that informs the prompt. The emphasis shifts from execution to articulation. At the same time, AI introduces a new tension between control and unpredictability. Designers are accustomed to maintaining authorship over their work. With AI, that authorship becomes distributed. The output is not entirely predictable, and this unpredictability can be both productive and destabilizing. The challenge is not to eliminate this uncertainty, but to engage with it critically, to remain selective without becoming rigid, and open without losing direction. This is not a new condition in design, but AI intensifies it. Another layer of complexity emerges when we consider aesthetics. AI systems are trained on large datasets that carry implicit biases, stylistic tendencies, and cultural repetitions. What appears as originality may in fact be a recombination of existing patterns. This raises important questions about authenticity and authorship. However, rather than framing this as a loss, we might understand it as a moment of increased awareness. Design has always operated within references, influences, and precedents. AI makes this condition more explicit. In this sense, AI functions as a mirror, not a perfect reflection, but a revealing one. It reflects both the data it has been trained on and the decisions made by the designer interacting with it. Every prompt, every selection, every rejection becomes part of a visible chain of reasoning. This visibility is perhaps its most significant contribution. It allows design thinking to be examined, discussed, and refined with a level of clarity that was previously difficult to achieve. It transforms the process into something that can be shared and learned collectively. For design education, this has profound implications. The integration of AI is not merely about adding another tool to the studio. It requires a reconsideration of how we teach and evaluate design. If thinking becomes visible, then teaching must shift from focusing solely on outcomes to engaging deeply with processes. The question is no longer only what has been designed, but how and why it has been designed. AI does not reduce the need for critical thinking. It amplifies it. It is important to avoid two common extremes in this discussion. On one side, there is an uncritical enthusiasm that treats AI as a universal solution. On the other hand, a defensive resistance that attempts to preserve design as untouched by technological change. Both positions overlook the central issue. The question is not whether AI is beneficial or harmful. The question is how it reshapes the conditions under which design thinking operates and how we choose to respond to that shift. If we return to the historical parallels, a pattern emerges. Technologies do not determine the future of a discipline by themselves. It is the way practitioners engage with them that defines their impact. Digital drawing did not replace design thinking. The internet did not diminish knowledge. In both cases, those who adapted expanded the possibilities of their practice. Those who did not gradually became disconnected from its evolution. Artificial intelligence presents a similar moment, but with greater intensity, because this time, the transformation reaches into the core of thinking itself. To ignore it is not simply to reject a tool, but to remain within a narrowing framework. To engage with it is not to surrender authorship, but to participate in a more complex and dynamic design environment. This season is an attempt to explore that environment, not through technical instruction, but through a series of questions that unfold across different dimensions of design. What does it mean to design when thinking becomes externalized? How does authorship shift when ideas emerge through interaction? What happens to creativity when it is distributed between human intention and algorithmic response? These questions do not seek definitive answers. They open a field of inquiry. If there is a risk in the age of AI, it is not that designers will be replaced. The bigger risk is that they will continue to design without reflection, producing outcomes without understanding the processes behind them. AI does not eliminate this condition, it exposes it, and in doing so, it creates an opportunity to engage with design more consciously. In the next chapter, we will examine how this shift from tool to partner redefines the very beginning of the design process, and how the act of writing a prompt becomes a new form of conceptual thinking. The discussion will move from interaction to intention, from response to direction. Because once thinking begins to take form outside the mind, the next question becomes unavoidable. Who is actually designing the idea? And perhaps more importantly, Where does design truly begin? This concludes Chapter 1 of AI and Architectural Design, From Tool to Partner, Rethinking Design Intelligence. Thanks for listening. See you in the next episode.